And again, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It's just Raj and I were actually chatting as we first jumped on the Zoom just about how busy everybody is and how busy life is these days. So we really appreciate your time at noon on a Thursday afternoon to join us and hear a little bit about what goes on here inside the walls of Village School. We're really excited about any opportunity we get to kind of peel back the proverbial curtain, as they say, and let folks see and learn about how school works for our kids. I think for everyone on this call, and myself included, and everybody, school today is very different from how we experienced it, and for a lot of good reasons too. And but that said, unless you have an opportunity to see, hear, and learn about sort of the method behind the madness, as they say, we have no choice but to understand school from our own experiences. So it's really a valuable opportunity anytime we get a chance to help our families kind of see and experience what their kids see and experience each day. So with that, we thank you. I'd like to introduce our guest today for our Coffee with the Principal. We have our supervisor for mathematics for the elementary level, K through 5, pre-K through 5, is Melissa Pearson. Dr. Pearson is here joining us today, and we're very grateful for that. And we also have Mr. Hugh Green on the call today. He is our his official title is Teacher Resource Specialist for Mathematics for Village School and Millstone River School. But essentially that's a very fancy title for, he's an expert in math instruction. He supports teachers with implementing curriculum and methodology. He supports students by helping teachers with everything from assessment to engagement to planning to curriculum. And he's an excellent resource for all of us as well, and for you. So we're very excited to have both Dr. Pearson and Mr. Green with us today. And with that, I will turn it over to them. I believe you both are co-hosts, which I think allows you to share screen if you need to. If not, just let us know.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Pearson, as Mr. Tolp said. Hugh and Mr. Hugh Green is here with me as well. And we're gonna share my screen and just take you through, I'll start with philosophy, and then eventually we are gonna do some math. So we are gonna get to do some math thinking today. I'm gonna share my screen and take us through our presentation here. I moved my keyboard out of the way, but I'm gonna need it. So first, just our goals for today, talking a little bit about the old and the new. We'll talk about our structures for math instruction, which is called a math workshop. We'll talk a little bit about growth mindset, fact fluency, and that last part, the tasks and experiences, we'll talk about the actually getting into doing some math. So one of the things we first wanted to talk about was the difference between, what's changed, what's old, what's new, and many things feel different. These aren't new ideas in the field of math education, but they are making their way more and more into classrooms, because the more we've learned through research and how students learn, we know better now. And so things like a timed test are not used anymore in place of different strategies. It's not to say that fluency with our facts is not important. It's just that we know better how to do things. We look at things from a more inquiry approach. We look for tasks that have multiple entry points. There may be one answer to a problem, but the approaches may be different. We look towards having more cooperative learning and group opportunities for our students. It's not to say that students don't get some of that private think time and think on their own, but we want to leverage that community of learners. We look at using hands-on manipulatives to learn and to delve into that conceptual understanding, and really thinking from a growth mindset about, I'm not a math person, to everyone seeing themselves as doers, knowers, and sense makers of mathematics. When we look at the stuff that's on the right, that's where we have all kids finding joy with math rather than a few students. So this structure here is how undergirds the way we think about math. So what we really want to is lean into students' funds of knowledge and their understanding of concepts that they come in with. So that's the you do part, where students make sense of the problems on their own. And then you move into that collaborative piece of where you're making sense of the problems with your classmates. And then the teacher on their part then uses what they see in the class to orchestrate a discussion around the different solutions. And then the I do is the teacher building into strategies to move students along in their learning. And then it moves into where back into students working on similar ideas with their peers and then working independently on those. So this kind of model is what we aspire to in looking at creating, moving from that number sense and that sense making into that guided math and to that independent work. So the way that we, oh, sorry, Hugh, this is your slide, sorry. I keep going on for hours.
Yeah, I have to unmute myself anyway. So, yeah, so the way we teach math is through a structure called Math Workshop. And the idea is to create a community of learners of mathematics. And Melissa, you're gonna have to control the scroll there, I think. What Math Workshop provides for the students, you can read through this. I don't want to read everything to you like that, but it encourages students to, it encourages their student choice. It allows for students to take ownership of their mathematical learning with support and guidance from teachers and peers. Math Workshop model provides students with tasks that can be done in a variety of different ways. Students are encouraged to utilize different tools to show their thinking in any way that best shows their learning style. So it's really geared so that students can work independently through a variety of different means and methods and learn at their best way of learning themselves. So 7. All right, so the structures for Math Workshop, the basic structure of it is we start off with a number sense routine with the students for a few minutes, and then the teacher will break either into mini lessons or guided math groups, or go to a whole group rich task. Or else, if they've done the mini lessons and the guided math groups, that usually is followed up with center activities. And at the end of the math lesson, there's a reflection period.
So one of the misconceptions, this comes into talking about growth mindset, is this idea of there are non-math people and math people, and that mistakes mean you're bad at math. So those are two misconceptions in one here. So really what we want for students is to all of them to see themselves in a positive way in doing math as doers, knowers, and sense makers. And mistakes happen along the way. We learn from our mistakes, and there are different types of mistakes that we learn from more than others. But the idea is that this idea of math and non-math people and is particularly detrimental in thinking about this and thinking about our own experiences. And when we talk to students about it, saying things like, oh, I wasn't good at math either, is really detrimental in the research, particularly to girls. So we try and avoid that kind of language when we're talking to our students or our children, and really lean into the idea of a growth mindset. And in mathematics, Carol Dweck is the researcher responsible for growth mindset, but Joe Bowler, a professor out at Stanford, has really taken this and looked at it through a math lens. And these are two texts that are available from Dr. Bowler. The first one, the Math Mindsets book, is a book that our teachers have read. And if you're looking for something to read more so, the Limitless Mind book would probably be a better bet than the Math Mindsets. The first one's geared more towards teachers, but the other one is geared towards a general audience. And like I said, we want all students to see themselves developing a positive math identity. And this idea of having a growth mindset in math is particularly helpful in developing those positive mindsets.
Okay, there's misconceptions about manipulatives that they're only for students when struggling with a concept. We really want students to feel comfortable with manipulatives at any time, whether they're struggling or they're not struggling. And we don't like to leave the manipulatives stashed away until somebody needs them. We like to have them out and available for everybody to use all the time.
Mr. Green, can I just interject? Would you mind
Sure.
a quick sort of definition of manipulatives? We're all guilty of it. We do that teacher talk that, and sometimes we have these words that don't mean the same thing outside of school.
That's our
Yeah.
next slide. You want me to go to that slide, Hugh?
No,
Yeah, go ahead. You can do that. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
You anticipated what we were going to talk about.
Right.
I learned that from math teachers. Anticipate, right?
Yeah, that's right. So you can see on this on the slide here the picture. Hands-on manipulatives are things that you can hold in your hands to work with. You can see the different types of blocks and different shapes and discs and things like that that help us to visualize what we're doing mathematically. There are also digital versions of manipulatives, and you can see that on to the right of the slide there. So what they actually do is they work for in the early developmental stages for sorting and ordering, helping students learn how to do both of those things and tie them into mathematical related abilities. They help them distinguish patterns. It's a foundation for making mathematical generalizations, recognizing geometric shapes and understanding relationships among them, making measurements, both non-standard and standard units, with application to both 2- and 3-dimensional unit or objects. It helps you to understand the base 10 system. You can see some of the base 10 manipulatives there, the blue ones to your left there. They're basically blocks, and it adds a geometric portion to basic number work and basic arithmetic. They help comprehension in mathematical operations of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. They help to explore describing relationships spatially and different geometry pieces. They identify and describe different types of symmetry. They develop utilizing spatial memorization and learning about experimenting and with transformations as well. They also help engage in problem solving, represent mathematical ideas in a variety of different ways, and connect different concepts in mathematics. They also help you to communicate mathematical ideas effectively. So manipulatives are really important. They help kids get that concrete piece. And if Melissa, you want to put the next slide up? So in the structures of mathematics, we go from the concrete to the representational and to the abstract. So it's the flow that you go through. So you begin with concrete learning, where students mathematical concept is introduced with manipulatives. Students explore the concept using manipulatives in a purposeful activity. And then the representational, I'm having a hard time with that today. Representational part being mathematical concept is represented using pictures or some sort of to sort of stand for those concrete objects. So instead of actually using the concrete object, they're drawing pictures of those objects as they work with it. And it helps them to both visualize and communicate the concept at a pictorial level. And then eventually they move to the abstract portion, where you're using mathematical symbols like numbers or numerals, operation signs, etc. They're used to express the concept in symbolic language. Students demonstrate their understanding of mathematical concept using the language of mathematics at this point. And next slide.
Okay, so I'm going to pick back up here and just talk a little bit about this idea. We hear this a lot because things don't look like worksheets like the way many of us learn. The kids still do things on paper. That's not that they don't do that, but the idea that the fact practice looks differently. And one of the things that Dr. Bolger talks about in her work is this idea about memorization and speed. And you know, the idea that, you know, students rarely cry about other subjects, nor do they believe that other subjects are about speed and memorization. And those are things that we want to break apart in math. You do want to have efficiency in the way that you're working, but we build towards efficiencies. That's not the first step in this work. And so when we talk about what we mean by fluency and building all those skills, we're looking for kids' flexibility in their thinking. We are looking for their accuracy. We are looking to see if they're being efficient. And like I said, we build towards efficiencies. And are they using strategies that would benefit them in this? You can see that this is far broader than just about speed. And it's not about memorization. It's about getting to things, being committed to memory. And that's what we really want for kids, is that when they have that deep understanding, we can get to memory. The way that fluency builds, and Mr. Tulp, if I start going too far down a rabbit hole of EduSpeak, please let me know. There are
I'll come get you.
come get me. Okay, so there are 3 phases of looking at fluency. So the first one is looking at, you have to move through all 3. You can't skip steps. When kids skip particularly the second phase of this, when they skip the second phase, that's where you start to see problems in looking at facts and getting to committing those facts to memories. But that first phase is counting. This is based on the work of Arthur Barodi, and students use objects or verbal counting to figure out answers. 3 + 8 for a student will start with 8 and then count on from there, 9, 10, 11. Then they go into phase 2, and that's where they start to reason with facts that they know. And this again pulls in from that knowledge that they already have to build on and come up with other known facts. So for example, if you're working on doubles, 5 + 5 = 10, then they know that 6 + 5 is 1 more, which is 11. This helps them to problem solve, particularly when they forget an answer. And the strategic thinking gets us to regenerate answers rather than relying on counting or guessing. And then when we get to mastery, that's where things are accurate and quick without counting. And this is when this becomes automatic, and it's about that commitment to memory rather than memorization. So this is, we've moved away from things like flashcards and time tests, because time tests create anxiety too, and it reinforces fixed mindsets rather than growth mindsets. And there are a ton of other ways to get to this fluency that are better for kids. So in thinking about a number, something like 4 × 3, if you don't have this yet, there are 4 different ways here that a student could approach 4 × 3. We build into this and start here. And actually, you would start really with what he was talking about with the manipulatives first. But as you're getting, and this becomes a mental exercise with students, a student can reason in their head about 4 × 3 to get there. Eventually, they're not going to think about 3 × 3 is 9, so 4 × 3 is 12 with the 1 more group. They're not going to think about it like that because it gets committed to memory with these repeated exposures in different ways. And I've seen this in my own teaching. I taught at High School South for 10 years, and I taught everything from Algebra 1 Part 1 through Calc Honors. And students that were more flexible with their thinking had an easier time grasping onto concepts throughout their math experiences at the upper level. So this really is setting the foundation for having positive experiences later. So all of this kind of ties to number sense. And that's what I just said, ties to this higher level mathematics. When you're more confident about it and looking and understanding how to break apart and look at numbers, it sets that foundation for later mathematics. The way that we do this, and Hugh mentioned this earlier, we talked about the structures of math workshop, is thinking through our number sense routines. Our number sense routines open up our math activities and create a sense of community that all students are mathematicians and they all have something to contribute to the math learning. And this starts our math learning off and fosters this community of learners. So how do we do that? We're going to run you, this is where we're going to start doing some math together. So in this first picture, this is an accessible number routine. This is, you can see sometimes it's not with just numbers as we know them, but it's also with pictures. So this is a notice and wonder routine. What do you notice? What do you wonder? So when we create situations for students to be active doers of math, this is when we can see a lot being more realized in their mathematical thinking and how they process sense making. You know, when we're looking at this, thinking, what do you notice? What do you wonder? You may notice that they're in rows. You may notice that there are Oreos. Some students may count. There's all different ways to kind of look at something like this, and it builds all student skills because there's typically not a wrong answer when you're looking at something like this. As students do this more and more, their answers become more and more mathematical as they progress.
Okay, this one's called Which One Doesn't Belong, and we're putting up 4 numbers there, and the students get to choose which number that they think doesn't belong to the group of the 4 numbers. And in doing so, then they have to explain why it doesn't belong. So in this case here, as we look at it, and you guys can all look at it and come up with your own conclusions now. Some possible answers are 84 is the only even number that's up there. 17 is the only prime number that's up there. 17 is the only non-multiple of 3 that is up there. 17 is the only non-multiple of 7 that is up there. 63 is the only multiple of 9 that is up there. 84 is the only multiple of 12 that is up there. 21 is the only triangular number. So you can see I ran through a list of 7 or 8 of those different possibilities there. There's a lot of math involved in that. There's a lot of learning that goes on when we do something like this. We have some really rich discussions with the kids, and they come up with some great ideas in doing that.
Hugh, can I jump in real quick on this
Sure.
one? So
Yeah.
I've seen this one done at multiple levels. And so like Hugh listed off a bunch of different ways that students could approach this one. I've also seen students look at I would talk about breaking apart numbers and looking at this. And I've seen this in 3rd grade classrooms where students would eliminate 17, because if you look at the number in the ones place and double it, you get the digit in the tens place in every number except with 17. And these are the types of things and thinking that kids start to really think about and breaking apart and looking at numbers. But the range of answers that you're going to get is going to be fantastic, and looking at all the different ways that kids can look at numbers.
Yeah, they have a lot of different approaches to it. There's a lot of really great discussions come from that. We go to slide 22 now. Okay, slide 22 is 2 truths and 1 lie. So you're given an example here where you have 3 different sets of manipulative type of numbers, and then you have the standard numbers to the right of that. In looking at that, they all appear to be somewhat correct, but the only ones that are actually correct are 1 and 3. 2 is an incorrect amount. If you regroup those numbers there, you'll end up with 121 instead of 111. So that would be the lie. 1 and 3 would be the truths. And slide 23. You said slide 23 is a standard multiplication problem, 32 times 15. We do a lot of work with number talks, and we'll take something like this and use it. A lady named Sherry Parrish has written a book that has a lot of number talk examples in it. And I believe this one might be one of those. But you have 32 times 15. Now you ask the students to solve it in different ways they can do that. So they might break it down into 30 times 15 and 2 times 15 to get 450, and 30, add them together is 480. They might break it down into full partial products into 30 times 10, 2 times 10, 30 times 5, and 2 times 5, getting 320, 150, and 10, adding those together to get 480. Another way they might use, and we do a lot of this kind of work, is that halving and doubling Melissa had talked about earlier. So in looking at 32, if they chose to, they could break it down into 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, 5 2s being multiplied together, or 2 to the 5th power, if you want to think of it like that. So you take 15 and you double it 5 times, and you end up with 480, 30, 60, 120, 240, and 480. So they have a lot of different ways of approaching it, and there's just a few just scratching the surface. The kids come up with a lot of ingenious little ways of going through doing one of these kinds of things. And all the students that are present get to learn from each other as they're coming up with these. It makes this a really worthwhile task to do. Okay.
All right, I'm back up. I just want to say one more thing about this type of problem. You'll notice that this problem and the one that I showed you, the 3 times 4, were both written horizontally rather than vertically. Students do this. So this 4 times 3 and now this 32 times 15 as a number talk would be something that would be done mentally rather than with an algorithm. And not to say that kids don't get into algorithms, because we do, but it starts here and then eventually it moves into that vertical representation that many of us are used to seeing as we move more into looking at using algorithms. And not to say there's not one standard algorithm, but looking at different types of algorithms here. We start here before we move to that vertical representation. So this gets into what we've shared, like there's multiple strategies for things. So like one correct answer, one strategy. New way is multiple entry points. There may be different answers, but there also may be different answers to the problems. So it's challenging to have a growth mindset when we're constantly given closed questions. Hugh's going to show you in a little bit, two different questions. One is very closed and one is very open. And when we have things that are just done one way and don't allow for any thought or any question, it transmits a message of a very fixed mindset around who can do math and who can't. And so when questions are opened up, it allows for more space in the learning, and it's not about memorizing somebody else's strategy or thinking, but also looking at and discovering your own. So when we talk about things that have multiple entry points, we talk about things like low floor, high ceiling. I know one of the questions is about how do you enrich, and it's through looking at tasks that are low floor, high ceiling that kids can take and run with them. So we're just gonna take you through a couple of examples here. This is a task that goes across the board. Again, it would start with something like a notice and wonder. But as students start to really look at this pattern, and just give you a second to kind of take a look at it here, there's something going on in the pattern in creating the numbers. It starts with 1, then we go to 2, and then it goes across, and then we can also look down and we see these different shapes. The numbers with the rings are going to be our prime numbers. We see things in the formation of a triangle, like 3's in the formation of a triangle. And then we see that repeated at 6 and then at 9. And kids start to notice different things and pick up on the way that these numbers are constructed in this visual approach. Then you can start to extend and ask kids to extend the pattern. What's the next number? What would 37 look like? What would 48 look like? And get them into different discussions about this that meets them where they are in kind of thinking through these different types of tasks.
I started talking on mute again. This brings us to one of the types of problems that we would have. Now, if you read this, it says about how many full day equivalents would someone have spent brushing their teeth between the day they started elementary school and the day they ended. And this is a very open-ended question because, and which is what makes it a really rich task as well, because there's a lot of different ways to think about this problem. What is it really asking? What we would do is we'd ask kids, so what do you think? How are you going to go about approaching this? And the questions they're going to come up with are, well, how many times a day does a kid brush his teeth? And how many minutes a day does she brush them for? Those sorts of questions come up, and they're germane to this because they're not listed in there. And whatever you plug in as those numbers is going to affect how you go. Additionally, is this for just school days or is it 7 days a week? Is this 180 days in a year or 365 days in a year? All these questions are left for the students to ask out, and they play into how they arrive at their answer. This can be a low floor, high ceiling type task, depending on how the students approach it. So we have multiple entry points and multiple exit points as well with it. So the next slide.
Can I just interject about
Go ahead,
that?
sure.
Just speaking from my own experience, we as the teachers and principals and everybody have gone through lots of training and participated in professional development around a lot of this as well. And I remember actually this problem is ringing a bell. I think we've seen this one before. And I remember as a participant in it, realizing, what this does is it creates like an authentic context in which operations matter. So reflecting back on my experience as a student, I remember learning multiplication or learning division because it was the division unit and because that's what was on the test. And it was just time to do some dividing, or it was time to do some multiplying. In the way it's presented, it positions kids to actually have a true felt need to multiply or to add or to divide, again, depending on how they go about it, like Mr. Green just said. So if they're talking about, how many times a day, it also taps into their natural inclination to want to kind of argue and challenge and wonder. And as I'm sure you all experience at home most days with our this age group, they'll say things like, well, how much, it depends. What do you mean by, how many times a day do they brush their teeth? Right away, that creates in them a need to, once they determine that, all right, twice a day, say, now they're going to start multiplying it by how many days, in a week or in a school year, et cetera. So it just creates that felt need, which is always really motivating, and it helps kind of cement the understanding. It's that application phase as opposed to just learning and memorizing.
Yeah, and we don't like to give away too many of our problems to the public. So you do have a tendency to use the same ones over again a little bit. The next slide is an example of a more standardized word problem. Jim brushes his teeth for 2 minutes, 3 times a day. How many minutes does he spend brushing his teeth in a year? 365 days in a year. You can see it's all scripted out. The students, you probably have seen thousands of these kinds of problems yourselves during your school time and with your children in some of the classrooms prior to us moving to math workshop. And you still may see an occasional problem like this come home. It's a basic, straightforward word problem. It is a little bit better than if you thought of this as the standard 6 times 365 problem you might see on a worksheet someplace, because there are words in it. They do have to think a little bit about it, but it's very straightforward. There's one entry point, there's one exit point. It's not very rich. There's not a whole lot of thinking has to go on. They just have to realize they're multiplying 2 times 3 times 365. Pretty straightforward. Next slide. Okay, the next slide is Fluency Games. We do a lot of games in the math workshop, and especially in the center activities. The games have several things built into them. One is some sort of mathematical skill, and then there's also strategic thinking. You're trying to figure out ways to win the game, so there's competition involved. Some of the games use dice, or as I like to call them, random number generators. We don't like to have the kids say they're playing with dice when they come home. They got to play with something that's really important, like a random number generator. But that adds a little bit of luck to the draw. Sometimes there's you're providing that luck, but they have to use a little bit of their thinking and probability in order to be able to decide which dice to roll, or whether to roll the dice or not to roll the dice, that sort of thing. So there's a whole lot of things that go on with these games. One of the big focuses on is working with their skills as opposed to working on a worksheet. They're doing problems that they're creating as they're going along, and they're reinforcing their skill practice that way in a fun way, a way that's really engaging, a way that they want to do. So all those extra pieces to it, the strategy, strategic thinking, the integration of probability into it, all those things play into making the games much more rich than just doing worksheets. Slide. Okay, and then 3-act math. This is a really fun piece to work with. 3-act math starts off with, it's usually a video, sometimes it's a picture-based thing. And the students are shown in Act 1, let's say a video, or in this case here, it was a picture, it might be a video of this gourmet gift basket coffee cup, the world's largest cup of coffee. And you'll ask the question to the students, what do you wonder about this? And they'll have some questions, and they'll have a little discussion as a class about what's going on there. And then what do you want to know? What do you notice about it as well? And they'll point out things they know about it. And then you'll say to them, what do you want to know? And at that point, the kids start coming up with questions to be asked, or to be asked and then answered. And eventually they'll come up with the one that you were looking for, like, how many cups of coffee are there in the big mug might be the mathematical thing for this particular one. And then, so the next act comes up. The students, well, you have the students answer the question by making, sometimes we work with estimations for a lowest possible answer, a highest possible answer, and what do you think your best possible answer is? A lot of times we work it like that. We're doing it in a classroom. Then we go to Act 2, which is where we give the students more information. What else do you need to know? And the students will ask questions, and you might give them some information, usually through another video or another picture. And that adds a little bit more texture to the problem to help them to be able to figure it out. Then you have them go through and work through it again, and you ask, once again, what is your best answer? That you're not worried about low and high at this point. Usually you're going right for your best answer. Sorry, I lost my video. I touched my computer and messed myself up. And then we go to the final thing is the 3rd act, which is the reveal. And in that case, there's a video that runs through, and it shows exactly what the answer would be for the question that we've focused on, that the students generated but didn't realize they were generating in Act 1. It's a real fun activity for the kids, a very good thinking activity, lots of rich discussion gets done in it, and we do these periodically throughout the year.
This a 3-act task also offers an opportunity for a deeper enrichment so in this case of the coffee cup, the students would have had to determine how many regular cups of coffee were in there. And it's hard to read on there, but it was like 32,140 cups of coffee. From there, kids can explore other like reasons that maybe are not so mathematical, like why did they do this? This actually happened to be, you can't see it, it's off to the right, but it was a fundraiser for Susan G. Komen. And so then there was that aspect of raising money for cancer research. And then you have other things in looking at this too, like this is for the Guinness Book of World Records. So what goes into making a Guinness record? So they couldn't just fill up a pool with coffee in order to make the world's largest cup of coffee. It has to be in the shape of a coffee cup. So then you can get into things like what if they wanted to do iced coffee, or what if they wanted to do something else, and like have the records been broken since. There's a lot of ways to take something like this task that allow for more differentiation and expansion on the original thought that kids can take in all sorts of directions. One of the things that we get asked often is looking at how does the math progress? So one of the last things we wanted to do with you was look at a progression. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second because I do want to optimize the video and when I share this. Thinking through what is it that, what does this look like as kids progress through the grade? So we're going to show you a progression video from Graham Fletcher. I'll share the link after we're done with this piece to the other progression videos, because there's progressions on early numbers. I think there's 5 or 6 altogether, but addition and subtraction, multiplication, division. But we thought the multiplication one was a nice one to share because you see where your children are now, and you'll see where it goes through 5th grade if you're a 5th grade parent, that culminates in decimals, more decimal work in 6th grade. So I'm going to reshare my screen again. If you can't hear it, please let me know.
So here's my attempt to explain the progression of multiplication. Well, most of us might think it starts in 3rd grade, but in actuality, it starts in 2nd grade, where students are expected to take a square or a rectangle and partition that square into no more than 5 rows or 5 columns. Here, the understanding of repeated addition is established. 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 is 25. Then, in 3rd grade, students take that understanding they've begun to develop in 2nd grade and begin to construct arrays using square color tiles, or any manipulative for that matter. The important piece is once they've actually constructed that model, they draw a pictorial representation which matches their model. Here we have 4 rows of 6, or it could also be seen as 6 rows of 4, depending on how you turn the model. And the big piece here is that we don't push an understanding on students, we let students explain what their model represents. The big piece is that the context will explain the equation, not the teacher. Then we take that understanding and we come back to the biggest piece probably in 3rd grade, which is that there's a relationship happening here. And that relationship is taking place between multiplication and division. Take this, for example. 12 divided by 4 is a number. 4 times what number is 12? Well, if we take 12 tiles and we put them in 4 rows until we run out, we actually see that we have 3 in each row. So there's a connection between multiplication and division, and arrays can be used for both. The context. Yep, let's go back to it. Here's a simple one. There were 3 packs of pencils. Each pack had 40 pencils. Well, at the beginning part of multiplication, students might do something like this, where they draw out 3 circles, and in each circle they put in 4 10 rods, so 40. Or they could actually go ahead and draw 40 little pencils. That's great. But the standards of mathematical practice, and in particular, number 7, want us to be efficient. And one way to do that is we can begin to make use of structure. And when we do, we make sense of it. Here, we begin to create an area model for multiplication, very much like an array, just on a bigger scale with larger numbers. So 3 times 40, we take it, build it out of 10 rods. We have 10 tens, which is 100, plus 20 is 120. Or it could also be seen as 12 tens. Really big understanding for students. Once students have established this, they should be diving into drawing pictorial models for what they're concrete. Again, we don't want them to be sitting there with manipulatives all the time. So we move them away and they begin to draw a pictorial representation for what their concrete model looks like. Then from there, we'll have them use numbers to represent their picture. All of the time, connections are being made. Then, eventually, after multiplying all of these 1s and 10s, students begin to collect and group numbers together. Now we're beginning to become efficient thinkers. The connections are being made all around because students are exploring. In 4th grade, students are expected to multiply 2-digit by 2-digit numbers. So what does this look like with a concrete model? Well, it kind of looks the same, really. So we have 23 across the top and 22 down the side. 10 times 10 is 100, and that's where those 100 plates come into play. Then, once students have gone ahead and actually built a model, they see that they have 4 hundreds, 10 tens, 6 ones, and they add that all together, 506. Then just like we did with smaller numbers, we expect that students should draw a pictorial representation which matches their concrete model. You can see the 100 plates, the 10 rods, and the 6 ones. There they are. Altogether, 506. And just like before, we'll ask that students go ahead and start using tens and numbers to actually represent their model. So what you're probably thinking right now is this is not efficient. There's too many tens going on here, too many ones, and students are going to get confused. And you know what? You're absolutely right. And it's at this point where kids say, this sucks. We need to find a shortcut. So what do? They begin to group and collect their numbers just like they did before. So here we have the box method. But in reality, it's partial products. So let's not call it the box method anymore and start calling it by its real name. Then we take that partial product understanding and we begin to formalize it into some kind of standard algorithm. Yep, this is a standard algorithm. It's a series of repeated steps. And you can see where each of the numbers come from. Then we have the algorithm that we're all pretty much used to. But you see that 0? Now the connection is made and students know why we magically put that 0 there. But all this understanding happens at the end of 5th grade. Let's not rush them. There's so much happening here and so much to explore. Let's slow down a little bit. Let's continue the conversation. Join me on Twitter.
Sorry, back and forth on the share. Let me go to my next slide. Okay, so the last thing that we wanted to talk about is ways to help at home. And so there are, I'll put these links in the chat. So the first one listed there is on our district website. There is an elementary math page that has a list of different types of games. It lists the philosophy. It has some general resources and reading, so materials, picture books to read, different games to play with the age levels in them. So we do have a section of the WWP page. Again, I'll put that in the chat in a second. And that has a lot of different resources there for you to work at home. Dreambox is a digital tool that we have access to here for our students. It's accessed through ClassLink. I'll put a parent page in the chat in just a second as well. And Dreambox is it's a platform that as students move through different things and the way that they answer questions, it will adapt to your child. So Dreambox recommends about 5 lessons a week. That doesn't mean 5 different days of lessons, about 5 lessons a week to see growth over time. And this is something that can be done at home as well as in school. And students do have access to this through the summer. So it is something that can extend beyond the school year in using as a tool. Bridges is our new foundational resource. This year we have it in 5th grade. It'll be coming to 4th grade next year. I'll drop the parent pages in there for you as well. The parent support pages for Bridges give you a unit overview of what your child is learning in that particular unit. And even though we don't have Bridges for 4th grade yet, it does give you an idea of the content and what's in there. It also does have some frequently asked questions about that particular content. It's a good resource. There are also activities on the family support page to do at home. But the Bridges and the Dreambox are digital, and I know that we're very mindful of how much time students are spending on devices. Bedtime Math, I'll drop that link in the chat in just a second as well. Bedtime Math does have activities that families can do together that are not device dependent. So there are all sorts of different activities on there, different grade levels of activities, but different activities you can do with your children as you explore different pieces of math at home. And the other thing too is really just talking to your kids about math when you're cooking, when you're grocery shopping, when you're going for a walk, and using the questions that we use a lot with our students, like what do you notice? How do you know that? And how did you figure that out? Do you see a pattern? These are all things that can be used at home to support your students in developing a love of math. And that was our last slide. So just say thank you. And I'll start dropping the links in the chat. But I see Hugh did the first one there.
I would say thank you right back to you. We really appreciate both of you being here as well. We talked about busy schedules earlier, and I know yours are both very busy. So having you here for this opportunity means a lot. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. Yes, thank you so much for this insightful math tips and instructions. So, Mr. Tuck, we have one question in our section, and the question is.
Raj, can I just interrupt for just a second? Sorry,
Yes.
I just accidentally dropped something else in the chat, but happy accident. This is, if anybody, I talked earlier about spreading math anxiety among children. So there's a Washington Post opinion piece about it, and I dropped that in the chat. I didn't mean to, but it's short if somebody wants to read it about the math anxiety. Sorry about that. Okay,
no worries. And what we'll do is, as I mentioned in the beginning of this session, we are recording it. And if the recording does go through correctly, we will have a link, a YouTube link, and we will post it in a day or two to everyone who's on this call. So the question we have is, how do you accommodate kids with need of advanced math instructions? Do we have gifted and talented programs in Village? How do they work?
I'll give the short answer to the second part about gifted and talented programs. We do have a variety of supports, program structures in place for students with gifted and talented students. That's the short answer. The long, very complete answer. Some of you who were on our call earlier this year, one of these calls, the Coffee with the Principal, we had Michelle Falanga join us, who's our teacher resource specialist for gifted and talented. And she shared a lot about that, but I also realized not everybody can make it to every call. So I would encourage anyone with any questions specifically related to gifted and talented programming in general, please reach out to Michelle Falanga. I'll put her email address in the chat here as well. She loves nothing more than to talk about what we do for our students with gifted and talented abilities. And we'll be happy to talk more about that. She also has resources and websites that she's put together that are a nice, concise place for families to access everything about that. But as far as the math piece, I know Dr. Pearson and Mr. Green can talk quite a bit about that. So I'll turn it over to them for that.
Yeah, I can start that now while Melissa's putting other links in there. We have a lot of material for the teachers to use in the classroom that are geared towards towards what you might think of as being your more advanced math students, your more gifted mathematical thinkers, that sort of thing. We don't have a set standard program for that, for geared straight for mathematics, but it's built into our math workshops. One of the reasons why we switched over to math workshop was to allow everybody to have opportunities to do what I like to call the really cool stuff in math, the fun stuff, the more challenging type mathematic works. And we have a great deal of material that has been put in there. I myself go into a lot of classrooms. Your children may have seen me in their classroom doing a lesson or two with their teacher. I pop in periodically and just say hi and maybe answer a question or two that happens to pop up as well. But we do have a great deal of stuff that we put into the classrooms that is available for your teacher to use. And again, I'm available to come in and do that too. And many of the teachers do reach out to me for that.
We've spent a lot of time over the last 6 or 7 years now, and even before that, really honing in on this idea of low floor, high ceiling tasks and multiple entry points, so that every child, no matter where they are in their learning, has access to a task and can take it wherever they want to. And we also have, Mr. Green said, a foundation of different types of activities, and the math workshop model lends itself to be able to do small group instruction so that every child's needs are being met within that math block. And Mr. Green works mostly behind the scenes with teachers, but he may go into classes, he may be coaching outside of the class, he's meeting weekly with teachers. So we do a lot of talking around math to support all our different range of learners.
Thank you. I'm trying to see if anyone has questions on the call. We have 6 minutes left in the call.
I actually have a quick question, if you don't
Yes.
mind. Thanks, Dr. Pearson and Hugh. I was wondering, is it actually detrimental to the process if students sort of sprinkle in the old school techniques? So for example, if a student were to use flashcards to memorize multiplication facts, would that in fact hinder their growth mindset? Like, would that
I think
step back?
it depends on the way in which the flashcards are used. I'll drop in the if I can find it quick, Joe Bowler talks about in the Fluency Without Fear, it was one of the slides. There are different ways to look at flashcards. I have a set of flashcards here, but they don't look like just 3 times 6. They'll have different representations on them. And it's not necessarily about going through and that speed. It might be going through and sorting by your 2 facts, or like different ways to kind of look at those flashcards rather than just that speed, and really kind of using the cards to think about the numbers on them and not just getting the right answer, if that makes sense.
It does, thanks. Yeah, my kids call me out when we're trying to do something fun and asking them some kind of like math question or something. They're like, "Mommy, you know what you're doing, stop."
Yeah, I'm gonna drop in the chat the link to on the UCube site is a place that we pull a lot of different tasks from. And this particular article, there's a PDF, it's called Fluency Without Fear, and what different flashcards can look like, because it's like I said, it's not, you don't want to go through with that speed, but just thinking about different ways to approach and think about the facts.
We have one more question. What about incorporating critical thinking and strategy thinking through puzzles and games?
Yeah, Mr. Green or Hugh can talk a little bit more about that too, but I think that's where like that tic-tac-toe game that he was showing, that starts off as like looking at facts, but through those different games, you're building in strategy and thinking around that. And when we look at data, we want kids to be critical consumers of data. So looking at we didn't have it in here. Maybe we should probably pull it in next time. Looking at a graph and like, what do you notice and wonder about a graph, and really thinking through like what's in there. Like you could do things with water consumption and tapping into, just some of our social issues around different things to look at in that, in strategy thinking and the puzzle games. And Hugh, you could talk probably a little bit more about strategies that you build with some of the different games. And
so we use a lot of different puzzles in school. We have a variety of different puzzles that we put into the teachers, basically into a Google Drive for the teachers to use for their math workshop. Puzzles are a great way of of working through math, doing math, and thinking about math. Innately, we all have this built-in drive to try to find puzzles to work with. Puzzles are the key to helping us learn how to solve problems in life. And it's innate from the time that man first started walking the earth, that our brains were wired to find out, seek out things to help the brain grow. And puzzles were a big portion of it. Almost everybody you talk to will admit to liking puzzles at some level or not. They may not like jigsaw puzzles, they like some other kind of puzzle. So they're really good for working your brains. Games are also as well. We have a bunch of different games we use in the classroom. There's a game called Prime Climb that you probably might want to get for your family at home and do that at home. It's a tremendous game. It deals with prime numbers and stuff. Chess is another game. It's a great game for the kids to learn thinking and looking at patterns and seeing how things work together, spatial relations, that sort of stuff comes from that.
yeah, and I know we're like almost short on time here.
Yeah.
And the critical thinking and the strategy also comes through as the kids are playing the games in class, the teacher walking around and asking probing questions and pushing kids into thinking about strategy and thinking more critically about the work that they're doing. And also that reflection period that Hugh mentioned at the end is also a place where some of that strategic thinking comes out when kids share different strategies that they did, so that if someone has one strategy and then it's shared, someone else might use that the next time they're playing a game. And the last question that's in the chat there,
That's me.
That's Mr. Green or Mrs. Kleckner, but probably Mr. Green, that has come in, and like that's the visible piece, Mr. Green going in, but also working with teachers outside of their during their preparation time with things.
And hopefully your child enjoyed that when I was.
Thank you again. And that's a perfect example of kind of what goes on here with the support that our teachers themselves are very, well informed, and they do a lot of their own professional development and research and all, but it's kind of with the support of like the district vision behind, mathematical instruction. And but in addition to that, they have the support of folks like Dr. Pearson and like Mr. Green, and he'll work with the teachers. The kids never even know that, he's meeting with teachers regularly and partnering with them. And then a lot of times different teachers have different things they're working on and want to try, and they'll sort of enlist him to come in and partner and either model something or co-teach something, or, and he's doing his own gradual release of responsibility where then they're taking that knowledge and it's informing their instruction, whether they're with him or not. So it's a pretty comprehensive approach, and we're really grateful for it. And of course, we're grateful for all of you for everything you're doing at home to support our kids and set them up for success here at school. So with that, we thank you. Raj, if you have any further business, feel free. Otherwise, we can let everybody go.
Yes, no, this is great. I would just encourage everyone to make sure that you keep reading the newsletters that come every Friday. There's a lot of good information in those newsletters from PTA, from school, and from the district. So I just encourage that. Please continue to read that and reach out to us if you have any questions. So thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, parents, for joining in. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you all. Enjoy the weekend. One more day.
Yes.